Okay, so today's discussion will center on ethics in research. Then, if time would permit us, we'll move on to experiments. So, in research work, whatever research that you are doing, you are duty bound to follow some ethical protocols. You are duty bound to follow some ethical protocols. So, for instance, psychologists, we have certain ethical procedures that each and everyone, as a psychologist, you're supposed to follow. And the moment, as a researcher, you don't follow those ethical protocols, there's a high likelihood that your license will be revoked. Because, especially in using humans, you are duty bound to strictly follow some protocols so that you will do the best you can to save human life. So, what led to the emergence of ethical protocols? One thing is there were certain instances or research instances which led to some authorities to regularize things to make sure that whatever research that we are doing, we follow some protocols. Why? Because in certain research scenarios, some people didn't follow any ethical protocols because at that point in time there was no ethical protocols in hand. So they conducted research on people, which led to more harm than good on these individuals. So out of it, authorities sat down and said or drew a plan that whatever research that we are doing, it is necessary for us to follow some protocols so that we can do the best that we can to save human life. We have several research instances whereby people did not follow some protocols. But in your syllabus, we focus on two main of those instances. And the first instance, research instance, has to do with the Tuskegee syphilis study. So this study was conducted in United States of America among African American, and specifically it was conducted in Alabama. So it is a longitudinal study. When you say a longitudinal study, it means that it took place for a longer period. They used the same participant for repeatedly for a longer period. And interestingly, they use only African Americans in this study. So what the researchers did was that they sampled African Americans, lied to them that, oh, they are conducting a study to find out bad blood in their system. So that was the term that they used. So in that regard, these participants received treatment for bad blood, according to researchers. That was what they told the participants. And out of this, they gave them good treatment in a sense that they indicated that in the course of the study, if anyone dies, their funeral allowances, everything will be taken care of and all that. So it influenced these people to be in a study because certain benefits was what was spelled out to them. But in the course of the study, not knowing the researchers, they were rather studying them to find drugs in treating syphilis. That was their ultimate goal. And in the course of they finding the drug, that's penicillin, which is used to treat syphilis, they got the drug treatment earlier, but still these participants were still what steady. And interestingly, the researchers, after they got the penicillin, they didn't use the penicillin on the participants, meaning that some of the participants who were suffering from syphilis, they were not given the penicillin treatment after it was discovered. And this research took place from 1932 to 1972. So imagine 40 years. So out of the 40-year trend, none of the participants received the penicillin. And out of this, majority of them died from the study. They died from the study. So getting to the latter part of 1972, researchers, people got to know of what was happening at Alabama, which raised a red flag. To that extent, then researchers the researchers were arrested, and the study was collapsed. And out of this, it led to a series of arguments in terms of using or creating a standard for ethical protocols. Then the next study that was conducted, which also they didn't follow certain ethical protocols, was Milgram study. So back in 1963, for instance, there was a series of world wars. So this happened right after the World War I. So people wanted to, World War II. So people wanted to find out what really led to soldiers especially to obey the Nazis, that's Hitler's people. So people wanted to really find out what really influenced others to obey the Nazi system. So Milgram, for instance, was really intrigued about what really led to people to obey. So he selected 40 participants, and out of these participants, Milgram also lied to them that he was trying to study the influence of memory on learning. So he selected these 40 participants, and out of the 40 participants, he also selected someone known as a confederate. So this confederate, we normally say a confederate is someone who knows the details of the study, has been coached by the researcher, and is behaving the way that the researcher wants. That's a confederate. And the confederate in this study, his name was Mr. Wallace. So Mr. Wallace knew about what the study was all about. He has been coached by Milgram to behave in a certain way. So when these participants, the 40 participants, when they came in, they do some coin tossing or balloting, whereby we have participant number one and also Mr. Wallace, who is the confederate. So Milgram would do the coin tossing with the learner, with one of the participants and also the confederate, which is Mr. Wallace. And when the coin is tossed, it was more or less like rigged by Milgram in such a way that always the confederate, who is Mr. Wallace, will be the learner. Then the real participant will be the teacher. So after the coin tossing has been tossed, and Mr. Wallace is the learner and the real participant is a teacher, the teacher is tasked to give series of tests to the confederate, which is Mr. Wallace. So Mr. Wallace will be in a separate room. Then the learner, who is the real participant, would also be in a separate room. And the real participant, who is the teacher, has series of electric shocks buttons displayed. And these electric shock buttons, every electric shock button has about 15 volts. And the electric shock were about 30 buttons. And every button, so the first button has 15 volts, then the next button also has an additional 15 volts. So it means from the first button to the 30 button, the moment you press the 30 button, that means you are giving a 450 volts. Then the first button, you are giving 15 volts. So the second one will be 30, the third one 45, in that order, up to 450 volts. So it means that every button that you press, it means the severity of the electric shock increases. So one thing is the teacher is tasked to give an electric shock to the learner. And you know the learner is Mr. Wallace, who is the confederate. Then the teacher is the real participant. So it means the real participant is supposed to give an electric shock to Mr. Wallace anytime Mr. Wallace gets a question wrong. And interestingly, there was no electric shock, but the teacher, who is the real participant, he has been made to believe that he is giving electric shock to whom? Mr. Wallace, who is a pretender or the confederate. And one thing is, anytime the teacher gives certain questions, Mr. Wallace is coached to answer the questions wrongly. He has been coached by Milgram to answer the questions wrongly. So anytime the teacher asks the confederate, who is Mr. Wallace, some questions, Mr. Wallace would answer it wrongly, so that the teacher, who is the real participant, will be duty-bound to issue or give out electric shock to Mr. Wallace. So at the end of the study, about 26 out of the 40 real participants, whom were the teachers, issued the last electric shock button, which is the 450 volt shock onto the participant. Sorry, onto Mr. Wallace, who is the learner. So 26 out of the 40, they gave out the last button, which is the 450 volts of electric shock, onto Mr. Wallace, who was the learner. So out of this, Milgram concluded that it means that when people are instructed to obey certain things, they do it to the extreme. That was the rationale behind the study. So my question to you is, the two studies that we just narrated, what do you think are some of the things these experimenters they did wrong in this regard? So that's my question to the class. So please, if you have any idea, you can use the emoji to raise up your hand. And I know right now you are experienced when it comes to using the Zoom. So I could see Chris, your hand is up. So please go ahead.
Yes, I think, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yes, I think the ethical issue here that they concealed from the participants were informed consents.
Okay.
I think they didn't inform them, or they didn't brief them well.
So when you say informed consent, can you give us details about this?
Yes, informed consent is when you seek the opinion or the view of the person to participate in the experiment, whether or not they will participate. I mean, when you brief them on the nature of the experiment that you are going to conduct, whether or not they will still participate in it. So here, I think they conceal the fact from them. They conceal the main objective of the experiment from them. They didn't have their informed consent to participate in the experiment.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
All right. So, Priska.
Yeah, I see the elements of deception.
Okay.
I think
Priska, please go ahead.
They were deceived. The participants.
Why do you think they were deceived?
were all deceived.
Why? Why do you
First
think
of all, they were made to believe that the Confederates is part of them.
Exactly.
In the sense, yes, in the sense that they thought the Confederate was being real.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I see the exception over there.
Okay. So any other ethical protocols that you think it was a breach here? Chris, your hand is still up.
Yes, I think debriefing also. I think after the experiment that you've ascertained your core results, you must also debrief them on
All right.
why you did that experiment. I think they didn't also do that.
Okay. Then Patrick.
So debriefing.
Yes, sir. Please, about the deception that the lady just made mention of, I just want to add up
Okay.
concerning the Tuskegee experiment, where they were made to know that it is bad blood that they will be testing,
Exactly.
and not that of, yeah. That is it, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But hello, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Please, sir, in the case of the Tuskegee, test that he's talking about, was it about bad blood?
Yeah, the researchers really indicated that there's a bad blood in the participant system, so they are trying to treat. That was a term they used.
Okay, it was that they deceived them.
Yeah, so there was deception in that regard.
All right, sir. All right, sir.
Okay, so any other thing, any other ethics that you think it was breached in the two studies?
Yes,
Sir, this is Samuel Mbura, sir.
Okay, Samuel.
So in the case of the Tuskegee research or their investigations, the part of human rights, the basic fundamental human rights of the people.
How?
All right, so we know very well that the investigations led to people becoming sterile. People sterile.
Okay, okay.
So for that matter, the health aspect of the human right, let's say the Public Health Act of the human rights aspect was breached. That's what I think.
Okay, I get where you are coming from. I'll react on it afterwards. Priska, do you have something to add? Your hand is still up.
Yes, I wanted to add to the infringing upon the human rights that the guy is just.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the thing is, the human right that you're saying, we normally call it maleficence and non-maleficence. I don't know whether you've come across it in your textbooks.
No,
we call it maleficence and non-maleficence. What it really implies that in conducting any research, you are supposed to ensure that the benefit outweighs the harm. The benefit outweighs the harm. So it means you are supposed to make sure that there's minimal harm coming to especially the human participants. But you could see that in the two studies, for instance, the Tuskegee, it led to what? It led to death. In Milgram study, since although electric shock was not executed onto anyone, but it caused a lot of psychological harm onto participants. Why? Because, for instance, you being a teacher, or you are a participant and you are told to be a teacher, and you being made to believe that you have executed the highest level of electric shock, that's 415 volt, onto a participant. Although you have already been debriefed that, okay, it was not a real electric shock, at the end of the day, it makes you begin to doubt yourself, and also makes you to think about your self-worth, that, okay, you're a bad person. How can you go to the extreme of in quotes, executing an electric shock to the highest minimum onto your fellow human. So after the end of the study, after everything, most of the participants went through a series of depression. Although they were debriefed that it was not a real electric shock that they executed, it made them still believe that they are a callous person, they are inhumane, because how can they go to the extreme of doing such a thing? So that was some of the psychological harm they went through. And one thing about informed consent is that in most situations with informed consent, you are supposed to give full details of the study to your participants. One thing about informed consent is to give full details of the study to the participants. But in some instances, especially some studies, it could be that, okay, you giving full details could lead to something known as demand characteristics. When we say demand characteristics, it means that some of the participants might guess your hypothesis or what your study is all about. So when you think that, okay, the study that you're doing, it could lead to demand characteristics, then ethically, you can what? You can decide to withhold certain information, which is also a form of deception, all right? So it means that in ethics, using deception is not a bad thing. But the core issue is when deception is used, you are supposed to, or you are duty bound to give full details of the study after you are done with the study. That is what we mean by debriefing. So at the end of the study, you're supposed to let the participants know the entire details of the study, why you decided to withhold certain information, and let them know the full aim of the study at the end of this of the experiment. So it means this, you using deception is not what? It's not a bad thing, but it all boils down to, after using deception, what next? You are supposed to debrief your participants. Again, you are supposed to ensure that there is privacy and anonymity. So that's why when you see some questionnaires being distributed, they will just ask you your certain information about you, but they wouldn't ask you to indicate your name and maybe your index number. Why? Because we want to assure you the anonymity, in the sense that when you say anonymity, it comes from the word anonymous. It means that we don't want anyone to easily trace whatever information that you've given to us back to you. So it means researchers go through the extent of making sure that whatever information that you are filling is anonymous, so that you feel comfortable to fill it. Then there should be that sort of privacy, in a sense that researchers are supposed to assure their participants that whatever information that they are filling, there's no way anyone will get to know, and it will be kept secured from people or from public access. So these are some of the things that researchers are supposed to do. You're supposed to make sure that there's informed consent. There's debriefing if there's any deception used. There's privacy, anonymity and privacy in there. Then you are supposed to ensure maleficence and non-maleficence. So these are some of the things that you are supposed to do whenever you're conducting any research work. All right. So Patrick Ankara, your hand is still up. Any question or clarification?
Yes, sir. Sir, about the maleficent and the non-maleficent.
Yeah.
Where you said it's more of this, let me say, infringing upon the human rights.
Okay.
Can we also say that Philip Zimbardo's experiment is also an example of this maleficence?
Which
Because the prison
experiment?
experiment, like Philip Zimbardo, like the
Yeah,
the
yeah,
prison
Zimbabwe prison experiment. Yes, it is a typical one. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Samuel Imbra.
Yeah,
Samuel.
I'm looking at the anonymity of research.
Yeah.
Is it not possible that even if you are not going to use actual names, you can use, let's say, abstract names just to, add credence to the research? Because if you say, based on anonymity, that this person is feeling the information or not, don't you think some people will conjecture and then, put in information to manipulate the dependent variables to achieve the main purpose of their
I just
research?
want Samuel, I just want to find out, how do you think people would do that? Would conjecture. That's my argument. So please, sorry, I have 10 minutes remaining. So in case a cat, kindly use the same link to join. All right, so please go ahead.
Yeah, so let's say we all do know, those who are into research know very well that if someone is coming out with a research, you don't mention the names of people, participants that you have actually interviewed.
Okay.
So my point is that isn't it giving room for some researchers who have a particular agenda to use that one as an excuse or as a lapse to manipulate the independent, the dependent variable to achieve their main purpose of the intent of their investigations? That's where my point is coming from.
One thing that you should know is that in conducting most of these research works, okay, we are trying to protect the privacy of the participants. That's what really matters most. And as researchers, you're also duty bound to what? To be honest and trustworthy. So that's why when people what conjecture or fabricate, let me put it in that fashion, when people fabricate certain data, we have softwares to easily keep track. Because when you fabricate, there are certain things, there will be some traces that will be left behind that will allow researchers to know that these things were fabricated. And one thing is, in most situations, when students are told to do research work, definitely most supervisors know that they know that students fabricate one or two things. But when you make it a habit, that means with time you'll be caught, in the sense that we have journals that researchers normally publish their papers. And most of the journals, when you are publishing your paper, they will request that you are supposed to submit your data, the data that you use. So if the data has been fabricated or data has been cooked, they can easily keep track of the things that you did. And when it happens like that, it means that you can easily lose your certificate. There has been instances whereby professors, they've been caught because they cooked data in years, and out of it, whatever academic feat that they got, it has been stripped off from them. Because so long as you are in academia, you are given the benefit of the doubt, and you are duty bound to be trustworthy and honest. So the moment you are caught, then it means that the full force of the laws will be used against you. That's the essence. All right. Okay. So please, any other question? Okay. So these are some of the things you are supposed to know. So I wanted you to highlight on the maleficence and non-maleficence more. I was expecting someone to ask me, so does it mean at what point can you say, okay, you are causing harm and all that? Because one thing is, you remember I said in Milgram study, for instance, although physical harm was not in play, psychologically, causing emotional distress is also a harm. So does it mean, so my question to you is, does it mean if a participant become too tired, could it be a form of non-maleficence, or could it be a form of harm to the participant? That's my question.
Sir, please, your question again. Sorry.
So my question is in an instance whereby the experiment causes the person to be too tired, could it be a form of harm to the participant?
I can say yes.
Why?
Yes, because it will depend on the type of, let me say, research that you are using, whether you are using the same participants in all the study or you are not. That is, if maybe you are using this kind of within participants, whereby you'll be using the same participants in the same research, I believe tiredness will come in, or let me say fatigue.
Okay.
And that is also a kind of, let me say, maleficent this thing that will cause to the.
So how do you reduce tiredness or fatigue?
By maybe practicing this between participants. That is making sure that you will not use the same participants in the research throughout.
But what if the research that you are doing using the within participants is the key thing that would lead to the goal that you want? What can you do?
Then, to me, I think then you should create some kind of time interval.
Okay.
Where necessary.
So it means in doing this, you are supposed to use some break sessions, give some break sessions in it.
Absolutely.
Sometimes too, it could be that, okay, the experiment that you're doing, if it is a survey, meaning you are using a questionnaire, it means the items are too long. Maybe you are allowing the participant to be filling about 150 items. So what do? It is much prudent for you to get short forms of the instrument that you are using. Maybe you're trying to find out how anxious or depressed people are. You've gotten a skill which measures maybe depression or anxiety. And the skill consists of about 50 questions or 100 questions. It would be much prudent for you to get a short form of maybe depression or anxiety, which has few items, and it is also standardized so that it will reduce the tiredness or the fatigue, which would be on your participants. So these are some of the things you do to reduce certain extraneous variables. So we come to that later.
Please, I have a question.
All right, Samuel, go ahead.
Yeah, so you are going to a community where there's language barrier, and then you have to engage the services of someone who will interpret for you. Ethically, are you supposed to pay for that, or there should be a
Yes, ethically, it is an expense, so definitely you're supposed to pay. One thing about ethics is that we normally say that compensation, you compensating your participants. We normally don't subscribe to it, but in some instances, you can do that, especially if maybe the items that you are using, they are too long, and you know for sure that people it would deter people from filling the questionnaire. Then it means that you can compensate them for the time that they will be spending when it comes to your research work. So compensation is not an all or nothing. The thing is, whatever compensation that you are doing, you are supposed to justify. Is it really justifiable? So it's not every research that you are supposed to compensate the participant. You compensate when you realize that, okay, you'll be taking too much time of the participant. Then it means it makes sense for you to